You're in the shower and you're already answering a question nobody has asked you yet. You repeat the same sentence 3 times, changing one small detail each time. In your head, the other person has already reacted, and you've already corrected your response twice before you've even left the house. You haven't even had breakfast yet, and you've already survived a conversation that hasn't happened. It's such a normal part of your day that you don't even notice you're doing it anymore. If this sounds familiar, you probably do it more often than you think. Today, I'm showing you 7 specific signs that confirm it. Plus, what's actually happening in your brain when you do this. It's not just something anxious people do. People preparing for a difficult work call do it. People about to text an ex do it. People getting ready to ask for a raise, say no to a friend, or just order at a coffee shop without sounding awkward. They all do it. Parents rehearse how they'll explain a rule to their kids. New employees rehearse how they'll introduce themselves on their first day. Even confident people do this before a job interview, running through questions they're almost certain won't come up. The version in your head is almost always smoother than the real one. You've already predicted the other person's line, you've already got your comeback ready, and somehow, when the real conversation arrives, you feel both more prepared and strangely more nervous, because you were preparing for a conversation that, in your head, had already gone a dozen different ways. It's not a personality flaw. It's closer to a background app running quietly, one you never remembered installing. Even the most social, outgoing people you know have scripts running quietly in the background before conversations that matter to them. Here's the first sign, and there are 7. Sign 1. You rewrite the same sentence multiple times before you actually say it. You never settle for the first version. You change it, shorten it, make it more direct or more gentle depending on how you imagine the other person will react. Sometimes you do this 3 or 4 times for a single text message, deleting and retyping the same 6 words until they finally feel right. Sign 2. You stop mid-task to rehearse a response. You're doing dishes, driving, folding laundry, and suddenly you notice you've paused what you were doing to finish an imaginary sentence out loud or in your head. Sometimes you even catch yourself mouthing the words silently, as if practicing for an audience that isn't there. Sign 3. You prepare responses for scenarios that will probably never happen. Not just the most likely conversation, the 3 least likely versions too. The ones where the other person reacts in the worst possible way. You build an entire branching script, complete with a comeback for a reaction that has maybe a 2% chance of actually happening. You'll even prepare a calm response for a reaction you've never actually seen this person have in real life. But the next one isn't about the words anymore. It's about everything around them. Sign 4. Ever notice you're not just picking your words, you're picking theirs too? You're not just imagining what you'll say. You're also constructing, with surprisingly specific detail, what the other person will say back. Tone, pauses, even their facial expression. In some versions, you can practically hear the exact inflection they'll use, as if you'd already had this exact conversation with them before. Sign 5. You feel relieved when the real conversation goes better than expected. Because the expected version in your head was almost always worse than reality. It's almost like your brain quietly lowered the bar so far that anything short of disaster would feel like a win. You almost forget that the outcome was never as dramatic as your brain had originally predicted. And here's where it gets strange. This doesn't stop when the conversation is over. It doesn't even wait for the conversation to start. Sign 6. Here's the twist. This one shows up after the conversation is already over. You keep the conversation going even after it's actually over. Psychologists call this post-event processing, a pattern first described in research on social anxiety back in the 1990s, where the mind keeps replaying a social interaction long after it's finished. Which is why you catch yourself replaying a moment hours later, thinking about what you could have said better. You might even replay it again the next morning, adding one more perfect line you wish you'd said. That's also part of why a single awkward moment from years ago can still resurface at 2 a.m., fully detailed as if it happened yesterday. Sign 7. And here's the strangest one of all. You feel exhausted after a conversation you haven't even had yet, like you already lived it. And that's exactly what happened. You just lived it internally instead of in reality. By the time the real conversation actually starts, some part of you has already been through it once, and that's not nothing. Why does your brain do this? It's not anxiety for its own sake. It's an attempt to reduce uncertainty before something socially risky happens. When you don't know how someone will react, your brain tries to fill that gap with simulations, a bit like a pilot mentally running through a maneuver before actually flying it. It would rather run the scenario 100 times in a safe, private space than risk being caught off guard in a real one. The problem is when this process never turns off. If every conversation, even low-stakes ones like ordering coffee, triggers the same rehearsal mechanism, the energy cost is enormous. Multiply that by every conversation you're even mildly unsure about, and you can see how quickly this adds up over the course of a single day. And here's the more interesting part. The more you do this, the less natural the real conversation feels, because you're training yourself to follow a script instead of actually listening to what the other person says. Your brain gets so good at predicting people that it stops paying attention to the person actually in front of you. This is part of why some days feel more mentally exhausting than they should, even when nothing dramatic actually happened. Because so much of the effort happened before anything even started. That doesn't mean the mechanism is broken. It just means that, like any alert system, it works best when it fires for the right situations, not for every single interaction of the day. Next time you catch yourself rehearsing a conversation that hasn't happened yet, it's not a sign that something's wrong with you. It's your brain trying to protect you from an embarrassment that most of the time will never actually come. Remember that conversation you were already finishing in the shower before you'd even had it? Try this, just once. Let the next hard conversation happen without the script you already wrote for it in your head. Notice how much of your anxiety comes from the real conversation, and how much comes only from the version you already lived in your head before it even started. And when it's over, come back and tell me which version of the other person, in your head, never actually showed up. That's the one worth letting go of.